You say what you mean. You always have. And somehow, that has become the thing people want you to fix. Not your temper, not cruelty, not a pattern of tearing people down. Just the fact that when you have a thought, you say it plainly, without wrapping it in 4 layers of softening language, without performing a level of uncertainty you don't actually feel, without building a diplomatic scaffolding around a simple truth.
Is this?
You speak directly, and you have been told again and again in different rooms and different relationships and different tones that this is a problem. The word they use is blunt, or too intense, or harsh. Sometimes they say you're a lot. Sometimes they just go quiet and something shifts and you already know what happened. You said a true thing in a clear way
before it consumes us. I
and
implore
someone
you, see the
decided
truth
that
in my
was the
words.
same as being unkind. And here is the part no one names. It costs you. Not just the relationship in that moment, not just the social awkwardness, not just the 10-minute debrief you run in your head afterward. It cost you in a deeper way, because you have started to believe that there is something structurally wrong with the way your mind moves, that the directness isn't just a style that others dislike, but evidence of a deficiency, a lack of something. Social intelligence, maybe. Empathy, softness. You have spent real time trying to be less, choosing softer words, pausing before you speak to run a quick internal audit. Is this too much? Will this land wrong? Should I round the edges here? And here is what I want you to sit with before we go any further. What if the thing you've been trying to fix isn't broken? What if the people asking you to soften it have been benefiting, very specifically, from the fact that you believe them? We're going to talk about that. It started earlier than you probably remember. Not as an adult navigating professional environments or romantic relationships. Earlier, in a classroom maybe, at a dinner table. The moment you said something accurate and the room got uncomfortable and someone looked at you like you had done something wrong and you had no framework for why, because the thing you said was true. That moment happened more than once, and each time the lesson wasn't explicitly taught, it was absorbed. Directness equals disruption. Your clarity is the thing that makes other people feel bad. The way your mind works is inconvenient for the people around you. So you adapted. You learned to preface, to hedge, to say, I could be wrong, but before statements you were not actually uncertain about. You learned to ask questions instead of making observations, because a question feels less like an indictment, even when it's pointing at the same thing. You got good at the performance of tentativeness, and it worked in the short term. People were more comfortable, things went smoother. You were easier to be around, but something else happened too. You stopped trusting your own perceptions, because if the way you naturally see things and express things is always too much, then the problem must be in the seeing itself. You started second-guessing your read of a situation before you'd even finished forming it. You built a checkpoint between your mind and your mouth, and you staffed it with the accumulated opinions of everyone who had ever made you feel like your directness was an imposition. And that checkpoint has been running ever since. Here is the internal monologue you run when the directness wants to surface. You recognize it even if you've never heard it spoken out loud. If I say what I actually think, this is going to get complicated. They're going to take it personally. They're going to think I'm being aggressive. And then I'm going to have to spend the next 20 minutes explaining what I actually meant. And by the end of it, we'll be talking about my tone instead of the actual issue. So I'll just soften it, say it sideways, let them infer it, or say nothing. And then you say nothing, or you say the softened version, which satisfies no one, least of all you, because you can hear the compromise in it. You can hear the thing you didn't say sitting right behind the thing you did. And then later, maybe that night, maybe a week later, the situation you could see coming arrives exactly as you predicted. And you think, I knew. I saw it. I said nothing, or I said it so carefully that it landed without weight, and now here we are. This is not a small cost. This is a pattern of being right and being dismissed simultaneously. Of watching things unfold the way you expected, while carrying the additional weight of having already tried to flag it and been made to feel that the flagging itself was the problem. The suppression has other effects too. When you spend years filing the edges off your instinct to speak clearly, the directness doesn't disappear. It reroutes. It comes out in frustration, in a sharpness that arrives at the wrong time because it's been compressed too long. And then that becomes the new evidence. See, you're too much. See, you escalate. And now you're managing the reputation of someone who can't control themselves, when what actually happened is that you controlled yourself for so long, the pressure had nowhere to go. There is a real question underneath all of this. Not the question you think you're asking when you wonder whether you're too blunt or too intense. Not am I normal, or is something wrong with me? The question is sharper than that. Why is your honesty the thing people want adjusted, rather than their discomfort with it? That is the question, and the answer matters more than any social skill refinement you've been attempting. Point 1. The word is wrong. Blunt implies damage. A blunt instrument bruises. A blunt edge tears rather than cuts. The word carries the implication that directness is a crude version of something that should be sharper, more refined. That what you're doing is communication without finesse, a failure of the more sophisticated social ability you should have developed by now. That is not what is happening when you speak directly. What is actually happening is that you have a low tolerance for inefficiency in language. When you know what you mean, you say it. When you observe something, you name it without first constructing a version of the observation that will be received with minimal friction. This is not bluntness. This is precision. These are not the same thing. Bluntness is careless. Precision is deliberate. The fact that precision can land with impact does not make it careless. It makes it accurate. The word blunt was given to you by people for whom the experience of receiving unmediated truth felt jarring. That is their description of their experience. It is not a clinical measurement of what you are doing. You adopted their description and applied it to yourself as though it were objective, as though the person receiving a clear message gets to define the nature of that message. They don't. The word blunt is a categorization error. What you are is precise. Point 2. Where this trait actually comes from. Directness is not a communication style that some people develop and others don't. It is what happens when someone cares more about accuracy than approval. And caring more about accuracy than approval is not a personality quirk. It is a value structure. It is the architecture of a mind that places truth above Socrates. I'll comfort that experiences the performance of certainty you don't feel as a form of internal dishonesty, that cannot easily sustain the cognitive dissonance of saying one thing and meaning another. You probably figured this out early, that the social transaction of softening the truth to make it easier to receive is a transaction you pay for internally. Every hedge that isn't genuine, every qualifier layered onto a statement you actually believe clearly. Every time you walked someone toward a conclusion, rather than simply stating it, you felt the cost of that. And many people don't feel that cost. They've normalized it. The performance of uncertainty is so standard in social exchange that it doesn't register as performance anymore. For you, it registers every time. This is not a deficit. This is a refusal to participate in a specific kind of social theater that others have agreed to without examination. Your directness comes from the fact that you take language seriously, and you take other people seriously. And do you take other people seriously enough to tell them the truth? Point 3. What the judgment actually reveals. When someone tells you that you're too direct, too intense, or too blunt, they are telling you something true, but it's true about them, not about you. What they are describing is the experience of receiving a message without the usual social padding and finding that experience uncomfortable. That discomfort is real. It's also information. People who have been handled carefully for most of their lives, who have been surrounded by communication that anticipates their reactions and adjust itself to minimize friction, develop an expectation that this is how communication should work. They have come to require that the truth be delivered in a way that protects them from the full weight of it. When it arrives without that protection, it feels aggressive. It feels like an attack, not because you have attacked them, but because they have attacked them, but because they have no tolerance built up for unmediated honesty. The judgment of your directness is not a social assessment. It is a comfort preference, and comfort preferences are not the standard against which your integrity should be measured. The people most uncomfortable with your directness are, almost without exception, the people most accustomed to being managed. That is worth knowing. Point 4. What this trait produces when you stop suppressing it. When a person with genuine directness stops apologizing for it and starts using it, not as a weapon, not as performance, but simply as the natural expression of how they see, something happens in their interactions that other people struggle to replicate. People know where they stand. In a world where most communication is layered with subtext and strategic ambiguity, someone who says what they mean is a rarity that people locate and return to. Not always comfortably. Comfort and utility are different things, but consistently. You become the person others go to when they need to know the actual answer. When they're done wanting to be told what they want to hear and need someone who will tell them what is true. You also make decisions faster, without the overhead of managing how your assessment will be received, without the energy expenditure of translating your genuine read into a socially acceptable approximation of it. You operate closer to real information, less distortion in the signal, cleaner data in every interaction, and perhaps most significantly, people trust you. Not universally, not immediately, and not without friction. But the trust that develops around someone who is consistently direct is a specific, durable kind, because they know the positive things you say are real, because they know you aren't performing, because they know that if something were wrong, you would have said so. Directness, unobstructed, is one of the rarest social assets you can have, not because it's pleasant, because it's real. Point 5. The difference between this trait used and this trait suppressed. There is a version of directness that creates damage, and it is worth naming, not because that's what you are, but because the distinction matters. Directness becomes damaging not when it's honest, but when it's compressed and then released without context. When it arrives as frustration after months of being held back, when it's misdirected, when the sharpness meant for a situation lands on a person instead. When suppression for so long turns your natural precision into a kind of pressure that eventually vents sideways. This is not your trait at its worst. This is your trait being misused by being denied its natural function. Directness applied, named, owned, used with awareness of its weight, is the thing that ends conversations that should have ended 3 months ago. It is what stops a pattern that everyone else has been tiptoeing around. It is what names the thing in the room that has been making everyone uncomfortable, which no one else will say, which is hanging over every interaction until someone finally speaks it clearly. You are not the problem in those moments. You are the resolution. The version of you that has been managing and suppressing is not kinder. It is just slower, more compressed, and less useful to everyone, including you. Stop using the word blunt when you think about yourself. Stop using too much. Stop using harsh or abrasive unless you are describing a specific behavior that caused specific harm, not just discomfort, but actual harm. Language shapes the internal landscape you operate from, and if the language you use to describe yourself was handed to you by people who found your honesty inconvenient, though you have been building your self-concept out of other people's discomfort. The replacement language is not flattering language. This is not about swapping a negative word for a positive one. The replacement language is accurate language. When you notice the directness and feel the old pull towards self-correction, the internal statement shifts from "I'm being too much" to "I'm being precise," from "I was too harsh" to "I said something accurate that landed with weight," from "I need to soften this" Do I need to be aware of timing and context here, which is a practical adjustment, not a self-condemnation. You are allowed to calibrate delivery without changing content. You are never required to change the content. The thing you know, you know. The precision is not the flaw. Not every environment is built to receive directness well, and this is not a personal failure. It is structural. Some environments, certain workplaces, certain social circles, certain family systems have been organized around the management of feelings to such a degree that any departure from the expected emotional choreography reads as violation. In these environments, you will be asked, consistently and from multiple directions, to soften yourself, and you can comply temporarily in the way you comply with any environmental constraint. But you should be doing this with full awareness, knowing that this environment is asking something of you that costs you energy, and accounting for that cost, honestly. The environments where directness functions are identifiable. They are environments where outcome matters more than process, where the question on the table is what is actually true rather than how to make everyone feel good about what is true, where the people around you have enough security in themselves that they don't require management. These environments exist if you are not currently in one that is important information about the current shape of your life, not a verdict about whether directness has a place. The audit question is simple. In this environment, does my directness make things work better, or does it cost me everything and change nothing? The answer tells you what you're working with. The next time someone tells you that you're too direct, too blunt, or too intense, you do not need to have a full counter-argument ready. You do not need to defend yourself extensively, or explain your intention, or walk back what you said to make them more comfortable. You need two sentences. Two internal sentences that you say to yourself before you respond externally. The first sentence is, this is their description of their experience receiving what I said. It is not a definition of what I am, the second sentence is, I can hear their feedback about delivery without accepting their framing of my character. These two sentences do specific work. The first one separates their experience from your nature. The second one creates space to make a practical adjustment if one is actually warranted without collapsing into self-accusation. You can say, externally, I hear that landed harder than I intended. That's worth knowing. And then you don't need to do anything else. You don't need to apologize for having eyes that see clearly. You don't need to perform remorse for honesty. The feedback is about delivery. Your character is not on trial. Shift 4. The ownership statement. Ownership of this trait does not look like pride. Pride is demonstrative. Pride wants to be seen. Ownership is quieter than that. It is simply the absence of the apologetic posture. It is the state of no longer introducing yourself to your own directness, as though it is something you have to explain. Someone who owns this trait doesn't announce it. They don't warn people up front. I'm very direct, just so you know. That is still the apologetic posture. Still framing the trait as something that requires management in advance. Ownership looks like not adding the disclaimer, not explaining, not softening the entrance, not pre-apologizing for the shape of your mind. It looks like speaking clearly and then being still, not watching for the reaction to determine whether you said the right thing, not running the post-conversation audit of whether you were too much, saying what you mean, meaning what you say, and then allowing the other person to have whatever response they have, without that response being the measure of whether you were right to speak. There is a particular stillness that comes when a person stops performing uncertainty about who they are. You have probably felt glimpses of it, moments when you said exactly what you meant with no modification, and it landed and everything was fine. That stillness is available to you more consistently. It becomes available the moment you stop treating directness as a liability that needs management and start treating it as a fact about yourself that doesn't require apology. Not a proud fact, just a fact. Like the color of your eyes. This is how you work. You say what you mean. That is not negotiable, and it is not a problem. You have been measuring yourself against a standard that was built for people who process the world differently than you do. The standard that says honesty must be dressed in softness to count as kindness. That clarity without cushioning is a social failing. That the people in the room who feel most comfortable are feeling comfortable because the environment is calibrated correctly, rather than because they are most comfortable with not being told the truth. You've been judging yourself by a standard that rewards the performance of uncertainty and penalizes the lack of it, a standard that was not designed with your particular mind in mind, and more importantly, was not designed to produce truth. It was designed to produce comfort, and you were never very interested in comfort at the cost of accuracy. That's why it never fit you. That's why you've always known, on some level, that you were complying with something that wasn't quite right, that the version of you that hedges and softens and pre-apologizes is a performance, and performances are exhausting, and you have been running this one for years. Here is what is actually true about you right now. You are someone who sees clearly and has been told that seeing clearly is a social failing. You are someone whose instinct is to say the true thing and who has spent significant energy building a system to delay, modify, or mute that instinct, not because the instinct was wrong, but because the people around you were more comfortable with the delay. You have been paying a tax on your own perception for the benefit of people who were not being honest with themselves about how much they needed to be managed. You are not too much. You are not too direct. You are not a social problem that needs correcting. You are a person with a particular relationship to truth, one that prioritizes accuracy over ease, that experiences the performance of false uncertainty as a kind of internal damage, that has always known when something was real and when it wasn't, and that has spent years being asked to pretend otherwise. This is not about learning to be more direct. You already are. This is about stopping the apology. Your directness is not the trait that needs adjusting. It is the trait that has been adjusted, compressed, rerouted, filed down, made smaller, in service of people who were comfortable with comfortable versions of the truth. That service is over, if you decide it is. And here is the truest thing that can be said about all of this, in the fewest words. The room didn't go quiet because you were wrong. The room went quiet because you were right, and no one else was going to say it.